Okay. Sorry about the delay, but we got there. I decided to change browsers and it wasn't favorable to me. I guess, like I probably have to start with a full disclosure. I'm the guy that buys all the shovels. I probably spend way too much on GPU these days. Not good. I'm not making any money. I guess, for those of you that haven't met yet, my name is Patrick. I'm a principal engineer at Flybuys, and I'm also the Melbourne TensorFlow user group organizer. Today, I want to talk a little bit about something that many people kind of like avoid talking about or think it's a little bit confusing. But I find that is probably the most interesting thing that came up in generative AI for us engineers and developers. I really want to talk about function calling with Gemini. So what I would like to cover is a few things. I'll try to make it a little bit more interesting because I know there's a few workshops that happen, a few talks that happen, and most people skipped it at the beginning. I did the same. I want to explain what function calling really is. I want to explore some use case. I want to talk about some use cases for function calling with Gemini, and then we're going to go through a quick sample for that. So I would like to make this talk a little bit more interactive. If you have any questions or if you want to ask something, feel free to interrupt and ask me. I think it's more important for you to understand the concept than go through the material. So it's not really a very long session, but I just would like to, I guess, explain to everyone why I'm so excited about it. So, but before we start talking about what is function calling with Gemini, I would like to talk a little bit about what are the challenges that we're trying to solve with function calling. So most of the times when we work with LLMs, we get things like very inconsistent responses back, right? We may ask, we'll put the prompt and say, okay, I don't know, what's the exchange rate for Australian dollars to United States dollars? And you get like completely different responses. If you keep prompting, you're probably going to keep getting more and more responses. Now, that's not a great thing for developers, right? We want consistency. We want things to be well structured. We want things to be well engineered. And when we work with large language models, that's quite lacking. The second problem that we're kind of like facing if we use them in our application is that the content is outdated. Most of the large language models are frozen to the day of the training. So if the last day of the training for the model was like, I don't know, a month ago, then it has no context or no information about what's actually happened in the last few days. So it's not current. And the third and more important is, well, the disconnected. Gemini won't talk to any other service. As a matter of fact, they won't even talk to the internet, right? To go out and find the information for you. It's just looking at the tokens and the information that has already been given, the embeddings that have been given to it. So lots of challenges, right? So here's an example of those, right? I was just playing around a little bit today, just before I came to the Meetup. I don't know how many soccer fans over here. Jesus, I should have gone with AFL. No one. I mean that's about wow. Okay, one. Wow. Okay, good. Okay, so I guess like here's a simple question, right? Anyone that lives in Melbourne and follows soccer, other people, not you. It's okay. Would know about the Melbourne Derby, right? So I asked, what's the deadline for buying tickets? And he gave me something about it's not happening anytime soon. Last time was in 2015. Well, actually, no, it was 2 weeks ago, right? That's not helping. Then I came and said, find me press coverage for the 2026 Women's Asian Cup that's coming up. Oops, sorry. For the Asian Cup. Well, again, it kind of like said to me, well, not to get find me coverage, and said, well, Australia is supposed to host it. Well, we know it's already hosting it. We know it. I wanted to find more information about why Victoria is not participating, and we're not going to have any games into the thing. And the last and more important, I said, okay, I want to go to the game. Can you help me buy some tickets? And the answer is, I can't. You have to do it yourself. He says, yeah. So there's not a lot of help because it is completely disconnected. So then we have to come back and say, okay, well, function calling can help with that. And we'll answer how it actually, actually what it is by answering how it actually helps with this. So if we were to define it, we would say that function calling is a structured framework that provides the ability to call external systems and APIs and enables consistent JSON responses. So it's a little bit of a mouthful, right? Like if you think about, there's a lot of things actually happening, but essentially you could distill it or compress it down to a simple thing, that function calling allows LLMs to interact with real-time systems like APIs, databases, content management systems, right? And then it has the ability to provide us back with structured content. So what does this actually mean? Right? I know that's still kind of like a little bit, undefined. So what happens, what we can do is like custom functions can be defined and provided to the LLM at the time that we send the prompt. The model function, talking about functions, you think about it, your traditional functions, right? We're talking about programmers here or developing. The model doesn't call the function that we provide to it. And that's a very important concept to keep in your mind. But what it actually does, it generates structured data output that specifies the function and the suggested arguments for it. Still not very clear. Still stay with me. And then what it actually does, it allows us to call the API with that specific structure. How do we do that? Well, we define the functions that we want to pass in. We pass them as a list if we want to. We can call multiples. The model, and that's the magic for me there, understands the purpose of the function and tries to answer the user query using that function. And then what it returns back to us is literally open API format that we can utilize. And then we pass that back. So I know that, like it's a little bit hard to maybe, I don't know, consider. So maybe we can visualize it. So I'm a visual person. So here's a simple visual of how it actually works. Okay, all right. Fair enough. I can do better. There's an easier visual. How about this one? So what happened? Think about, let's say that we're actually building a bot and we're writing an application. The first thing that we do is like we send out a prompt. We may capture that from our user, right? When the user may say, like in my last example, for example, I want to buy tickets for the match. We then say along that prompt and say, use these functions, right? That pretty much are containing open API information about our APIs that do that piece of work. We pass that to Gemini. Gemini looks at the query, figures out which of our function is the most relevant to do, and gives it back as filled in with the API parameters. Completely ready for us to do. Then all our apps has to do is actually pull that structure, make the call, get back the response, and then we feed it right back up to Gemini that can give it back to the user. So we'll go through code a little bit, like to kind of like describe it a little bit better. But if I go back to the original scenario, let's say that we feed to the LLM 3 functions, which is buy tickets, find available tickets, or present pricing for available options. By feeding them into the prompt, it would pretty much pre-populate it for us with all the user details. Now, why is that exciting and why I think it's important? It's because it is quite different. And there are a lot of things that we can do as developers with generative AI, actually, now that before we couldn't. And here's some of those examples, right? So for example, we could use generative AI for workflow automation. Why? Because we have full control. We can pass all the functions back to the model, right, and do it ourselves. We could use it for data analysis and visualization. Actually, Joshua was talking about data. Think in this scenario here, where we could potentially use function calling that defines simply the entities of our data and information. And then we could have one of our stakeholders using our LLM ask and say, give me the top selling product in the last 3 months. They don't have to know SQL. Actually, as a matter of fact, we don't have to know SQL. What the LLM do will recognize that you're looking for product information. It will generate the SQL query and it will give it back to our app for us to actually execute it. And of course, like by doing that, we can even do it for things like, like routing or support calls or information. So it just gives us back a lot more control. And this is really the benefit for me. For the first time, we can manage and ask the large language model to do something that is outside of its original programming, right? we have the option to pass it our own function, our own tools, our own API implementations for it to respond with. It allows us to prototype very quickly. We don't even have to understand the API ourselves. As a matter of fact, we don't even have to know how to construct a call to make that call to that API. Gemini will do that for us. It takes away all the need for us to write code and templates and information because, well, again, it's all built in. It will do that for us straight away, again. And it gives us a lot of flexibility. And when I talk about, like in the diagram before, it doesn't really matter what language you're using. You could be using writing a web app using JavaScript. You could be working on mobile with Kotlin or Swift. You could be using any of your AI or ML frameworks with it. You're not restricted at all on how you're actually going to use it. So before I go into a code demo that will probably explain that a little bit, I just want to open it up for questions. I know I moved very quickly because I thought you were going to have a lot of questions. So open. Yes.
This function calling, and what do we call it as a prompt engineering? What is the difference? Is it a same thing or it's a subset?
Very good question. Very good question. And I'll actually show it in the demo as well. So when we talk to LLMs, right, and we create a prompt, we provide as much information as we can about the prompt. But what you're going to get back from that is a text response, right? That's what happens with most LLMs. With function calling, you don't get that. What you get back is JSON. You get a JSON structure that pretty much tells you what is the endpoint that you need to hit for that system, what are the parameters for the endpoint, and because it has access from the prompt from the user, it will pre-populate it with the parameters inside. So for example, if I used it to buy tickets, it will come back and say, you need to hit ticketex/buy and pass in as a parameter name, Patrick, address, my address, credit card details. You don't have to worry about it anymore. You just pretty much take that structure and you send it straight to Ticketek. The ticket comes back, and then when the response comes from that, you can feed it back into the LLM to respond to the user. So quite different, right? And that's the concept of it. There's two keys here. One, it doesn't call the function. Two, it doesn't give you text anymore. It gives you developer structured data. Yeah.
Is it like querying the Zapier, for example? Zapier is like a bunch of API endpoints, parameter definitions, documentation over there.
Yeah.
So it's like querying the Zapier
It is
technical documentation or something. Like that.
Yes, it is, but it's not just querying. It's actually, as I said, it's pre-populating it for you. So think of this scenario, right? Let's say that there is an API that gets that we can call to get the weather, right?
Yeah.
You need to know the endpoint for the API. First thing, you need to know what the parameters are for that API, and you need to also capture whatever input the user has given you. If you use function calling and you say, hey, there is this API that has this open API schema, which I'm actually passing to you, use this when I send you prompts. It is smart enough to come back and say, hold on a second, the user just asked me about the weather. There is a function you told me about an API that fetches weather information. I know about it. I know its parameters. I'm going to fill in all the user data for you, and I'm going to give you the query straight for you to call it whenever you want. Yeah. So pretty impressive, right? Completely different use case entirely from the one we have with Generate. We're no longer generating code. Yes.
What happens if the user doesn't give the data that you give? How does it get the data to fill in the
Very, very good question. And the model will ask you again. Yes, it will do that. So as a matter of fact, most of the time, because you're not going to get all that, it will come back and say, we may need to make 2 or 3 different calls. You may come back and say, okay, I want to know how much stock is available in this store, and I'm interested to buy this item. You may come back and say, well, actually, which version of this item? Right? So then the magic even happens there. It will suggest to you as a developer to say, hey, actually, by the way, you need to hit the other endpoint as well with that data because I can't answer the user's query. Yes.
So how does handle authentication? I know Google is handling our account have access to the Google service anyway. But doesn't mean we need to hand like our application authorization to Gemini.
Yes, we do. We do, but again, that this is managed by your app, by our app, right? So, like if the user is authenticated into our app and we have that information, we can pass that along with the prompt. So Gemini doesn't actually need to know anything more about than what normally do for LLMs, right? The prompt itself. The only difference is it now understands also the concept, the context of the schema. So it's not making the call. It's not making the call itself. Again, remember, right? It delegates it back. It delegates it back to us. Does it sound a bit clearer now, right, on what it actually do and what it actually does? All right, let's see a little bit of an example. Oh, I need to change the setting. Okay. Sorry, Python again, but like I'm actually going to use the collab. The collab that was presented for this because it is quite new and some of the examples are a little bit broken. So I'll try to fix it up a little bit here and kind of like run through it. So again, just as a reminder, this is what I'm going to try and demonstrate in this flow. So we're going to get input from the user. We're going to pass in a function call. The Gemini will come back and give us the parameters for the API. We're going to make that API call, and we're going to feed back the response back to the API. So I'll start with, there's a bit of setup. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to run it again. And I'll authenticate my collab to my GCP. So to work with Gemini, you obviously need to have a Vertex AI account. I just created a little project there for us to do that. That's all basically set up. So you can just pretty much ignore that. And just to demonstrate the value, I just want to focus a little bit on the current situation. If I just send a simple query back into Gemini, right, I'll get a response like this. I'm not going to run the cell again because I want to show you this response. I said, what's the exchange rate for euros to dollars today? And I got this. Well, not very helpful, right? I mean, it's almost like saying to me, just go out and figure it out yourself. That's not what it was at some point in time. Just I don't know. So let's try a little bit of a workaround now, right? Let's come back and say, you know what? Patrick, your prompt was horrible. You need to fix it. And you need to make it a bit more specific to you. So if I come back and say, all right, here's the instructions. What is the exchange rate between euros to US dollars? And the task is to extract parameters from the user input and give me back a JSON payload that I need to utilize, right? What do you think will happen if I actually execute this? Hopefully my session is still active. Otherwise, I may have to rerun it. You can do it. Okay, all right. Let's do it. I won't be long, it's okay. Collab is already pre-installed with a lot of the Gemini stuff, so let's just re-authenticate as well. Stuff. Project. So I keep forgetting that because I haven't used the pro version of Colab, that the session dies and then sometimes all the information that's been sitting in there dies. Okay, bear with me, we're almost there. All right, great. So let's run it now. Okay, you gave me JSON. Well, first of all, that's not valid JSON. Second, it doesn't tell me anything. It just tells me, there you go, change some JSON from to. Not happy. Not great. So how about we actually go and put function calling into practice? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at selecting an API. So we're going to go to Frankfurt.app, which is an exchange rate API. And what we're going to do there is just pretty much just come back and say, we'll add obviously the URL and the structure for our responses. And when we make the call to the API, you'll see we'll get a structure like this. I don't know how clear it is, but basically on this date, it's all the exchange rates for what is available on the API. Now the API itself has a simple structure where you will pass essentially three parameters from I guess like from currency to currency and the date. And it has an open API definition like this. Pretty straightforward, right? We have a path of date, and then we have obviously three different parameters that we're getting. So let's see how we can put function calling into practice now. So we'll start by, or actually we don't have to initialize the model. I've done it already. Let's start with the first part, which we define the function, which was in our diagram. So all I'm really doing here is I'm defining a function that's called getExchangeRate, right? Which is a function declaration with that. It has a description that says get the exchange rate between different countries. And here are the parameters. The parameters basically match what was in the open API of the API that we actually ordered. It's the schema essentially of the API that we're hitting. We have currency date from to. It's just a definition, right? So I'm just going to create that definition, and then I'm going to create an exchange rate tool, which is essentially a container for all the functions that we can actually pass in. At the moment, I'm only passing one. And then what we do is we're going to make a call. We're going to say to our API, we're going to put a prompt that says, what's the exchange rate from Australian dollars to Swedish krona? And more importantly, how much is 500 Australian, right? So what do you think will happen now? Since our model has already an understanding of the model, it will give us back a response that has much more useful information. Let's run that and see what it gave us back. What are we seeing? It is the JSON that we need to use to call the API. It pre-populated it for us. So it said to us, hey, you need to call the get exchange rate. You need to pass in the latest as the currency date. You need to pass AUD, and you need to pass SEK for kronas. So remember, no forms. Our user didn't type anything. All we really did ask in our prompt, it said, what is the exchange rate between Australian and SEK? Gemini was smart enough to say, hey, I've got the definition here up here for this. That is about exchange rates. So how about I pre-populate that definition for you to call? So then what's the next step? Well, quite easy. I've got this with developers. So what we do is we pretty much turn it this, I think, look through it to get it, but you get the parameters that you need from the JSON response. And then you make an API call. I'll just call the API. And the API pretty much gave me back, like the specific information that I need for, again, for most of the dates, but I have the actual information for the euro, for the Australian, for the SEK that I need. Now, what I need to do as the final step, if you remember in our diagram, is send that back to Gemini and say, hey, I've got, like for the context that we had before, where the user asked us to pretty much just like give us, like the exchange rate between those two currencies. Here's the prompt. Here is the content for it. And here is pretty much the tool that we utilized. And here is the response that our member is going to get. And say, hey, okay, I can help you with that. Now remember, it's fully aware of the context and of the response. Now it has the responses of the API on top. And it responds like this. And say, as of today, which is important, the exchange rate between Australian and SEC is, sorry, you can't see this. Let me see if I can take it up a bit. Right, is this. And more importantly, look at this here. It will do the calculation for the user. It will answer how much will 500 Australian dollars is to Chrome, right? Which I think is pretty impressive. And then if you start kind of like trying to apply this into different contexts, you can see how it can help you potentially with workflows, with ticketing systems, with any other kind of like information that you may have. So, any questions from this? The code, yeah. Like I will share it. It is actually, as I said in full disclosure, that's just a fixed code lab that Google has. But I'll send it through for everyone to utilize with the fixed instructions, and I'll send it back. And since we're talking about code, I can show you there is another example that's a little bit more complicated. But since you now understand a little bit the concept better, look at this scenario. Right, let's go through this. Here, in this case, what we're really doing is we are passing in 3 different functions. We don't have just one, right? So we can pretty much come back and say, get the stock, like if we're actually querying from something, get the store location, and place an order, right? They're all 3 different things that you can do in an API for an e-commerce. And then when we pass that through to Molo, the Molo will just pretty much come and pre-populate all the requests. Oh, you can't see it? Sorry. Here, I'll go back. So the objective here is to pretty much use exactly this Gemini API, but this time around is to provide a bit more context and have multiple, I guess, requests. And I'm not gonna run it again. It's broken. I haven't had the chance to fix it entirely, but I just want to demonstrate the concept right here. Forget the importing libraries. So we'll look at the chat example, right? We use function calling, with 3 different prompts that go back into the model, which is get product information, get store locations, this functional e-commerce store, obviously, right? And place the order. And what is being defined again, just like on our previous example, is the name, the description, and the parameters. And when they get passed into, sorry, you won't be able to see it. When you get passed into the API, you get back the exact response in JSON. So for example, in this example, it pretty much came back and said, okay, you need to make a call for get product info and pass in pixelate prop, because that's what the user asked for. And then, of course, it's smart enough to understand that when the response came back, it didn't really have all the information that it wanted. It will ask the user where they can buy it, and then give us back another JSON response to say, now you actually have to go and get the store location. And here is the information that you need to fill in. And we'll continue until the final order. One thing that you could potentially do, I don't know if I would recommend it. I kind of like hear sometimes people say like, well, actually, why isn't it making the API call? It would make life a bit easier, right? It already has a structure, it already has the API. Why not? Well, I don't know. I feel it's generative AI. I wouldn't really fully trust it. I would rather have control over this. But in essence, like we could still do it. We could still put it into a loop. And every time we get back a response, we could trigger an event and call the API with the responsive information. You can trust that the schema is correct. You can trust that the information and the parameters are correct and have been pre-populated. So nothing is really stopping you from doing it. But I feel like it relinquishes a little bit of control from us from doing this thing. Yes.
Can you make it not retrieve it as a JSON, treat it like as a Python stream, and then automate that part? So when you retrieve the Python, it will then go to Gemini again and then we'll give the user output. So there is no need of flip-flop screen between when the user inputs it.
Okay, so you can't. It will always give you back structured data that is purpose, right? It will always give you JSON, but you're in control of this, right? Because remember, everything else is running outside your app. So you could pretty much write a JavaScript or like mobile code or whatever else language you're actually working on to do that. Every time we read the JSON, I could literally iterate through it, right? Just convert it to dictionary, make the call. So you could make that as part of your business logic of the app. The model's role here is to pretty much almost like if I were to kind of like, I don't know, distill it even further down, is to understand what the user is asking, understand that if you have an API or a service about it, and then make your life easier and say, hey, by the way, you need to call your API to get that data from the user. Here it is pre-populated with a full request. Yes.
Yeah, so when you have more than one tool, you need to provide the model some context as to what
Yes, you can. You could even do it by prompt, right? Because you could be using it in different parts of your application. But I would recommend not putting too many functions even within the tool, right? Because you take away a lot of the generative stuff. You still want it to behave like obviously like a generative AI or like an LLM. And only go to the use cases that are specific to you, to those specific areas or those specific endpoints, right? It doesn't always have to go to your systems. It doesn't replace. Otherwise, might as well write a traditional app. We're always going to be making the call our APIs. This is bridging the gap between having all the creativity and all the language understanding of a large model and the full control that you have as an engineer or as a developer about doing that. So, but yes, you could pass multiple tools, and you can pass it on prompt by prompt. Yes.
So I'm not sure if I missed something. So this sounds very similar to the language.
Yes. Yes, it does, but it doesn't replace it. As a matter of fact, you would use it with LangChain in this case, because LangChain gives you the flow, right, of which things to call, but it won't do anything like the function calling does. So there's no way through LangChain to get back structured JSON data pre-populated. Yeah.
Can all those functions and get to the
Yes, but the generation part of those functions, yeah, the JSON creation, and also in LangChain we're a bit more declarative, right? We tell it when to make the call. While here the suggestion comes from the LLM itself. It says, I think you need to call your own API, right? This is the magic for me. All the time? Okay. I'll answer more questions when we have drinks. I knew this was going to be more about questions than we present. So thanks everyone. I hope it's a bit clearer, and I hope you kind of I don't know, start getting ideas about how to go about.